If I hadn't saved you, you'd be nothing. Brenda's sugary voice drifted over her porcelain tea set, masking the venom underneath. Outside, Seattle rain hammered against the roof, but inside, I was drowning in her humiliation. I was 24, secretly paying the mortgage she bragged about, yet here I was serving cookies like a maid while she called me a leech in front of the neighbors. Then, the doorbell shattered her performance. I opened it to find a stranger and a tow truck. "We're repossessing the Civic," he said flatly. "Payment 6 months overdue. My car, my lifeline, gone. Have you ever felt like your mere existence was a debt you could never pay off? For 10 years, I lived with a shackle around my ankle, made of 2 words. Thank you. I believed I owed Brenda my life, simply because she didn't send me to an orphanage when my dad died. But standing there in the rain, watching my car disappear down the street, something inside me finally broke. I realized I wasn't a daughter to her. I was an investment strategy, and she was charging predatory interest on my survival. But that tow truck wasn't the end of my story. It was the loose thread that unraveled a decade of lies. If you think this is just a story about a girl losing her car to a wicked stepmother, you're wrong. This is the story of how I discovered that the roof over her head actually belonged to me. And if you've ever been manipulated by someone who weaponizes their sacrifice to control you, stay with me. You are going to want to see exactly how I legally evicted the woman who claimed she saved me. To understand why that repossession notice felt like a knife to the gut, you have to understand the decade of manipulation that led up to it. My name is Maya, and for the last 10 years, my life hasn't really been my own. It belonged to a ghost and a grifter. When my dad died of a heart attack, I was 14. I remember the funeral not because of the grief, but because of the performance. Brenda, my stepmother, threw herself onto the casket, wailing loud enough for the neighbors 3 streets over to hear. She grabbed my hand in front of the social worker and the lawyer, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "I won't let her go to foster care," she sobbed. "She's my daughter now, we'll get through this together." Everyone called her a saint, a martyr, a young widow taking on the burden of a moody teenager. I believed them. I felt so lucky, so grateful that she didn't throw me away like an old piece of furniture. But the moment the front door closed and the guests left, the performance ended. Brenda didn't step up, she collapsed. And she pulled me down with her. Within a month, the house began to change. My dad was a minimalist, but Brenda? She filled the void with things. Boxes of QVC purchases, stacks of magazines, porcelain dolls, clothes she never wore. The living room became a maze of clutter, smelling of stale vanilla candles and cheap white wine. She stopped cooking. She stopped cleaning. She stopped leaving the house. "I'm just too depressed, Maya," she'd sigh from the couch, gesturing for me to bring her a refill. "You understand, don't you? You're the strong one." There is a specific psychological term for what happened to me next. I didn't know it back then, I just thought I was being a good daughter. It's called parentification. It happens when the roles reverse, and the child is forced to become the emotional and physical caretaker of the parent. It's a subtle, insidious form of abuse because it disguises itself as maturity. When I cooked dinner at 14, Brenda called me responsible. When I cleaned up her vomit after a wine binge at 15, she called me her angel. When I skipped prom to organize her tax receipts because she was too overwhelmed, she called us a team. "It's just us against the world, Maya," she would whisper, gripping my hand with a desperation that felt like a trap. "We only have each other." She weaponized her grief to shackle me. If I wanted to go to the movies with friends, I was abandoning her. If I wanted to save money for a field trip, I was being selfish. She conditioned me to believe that my needs were secondary to her comfort. And then, there was the money. After Dad died, I started receiving survivor benefits from Social Security. Checks meant to take care of me until I turned 18. I never saw a dime. Brenda intercepted the mail every month. "I'm putting it all in a trust for you," she promised, her eyes wide and sincere. "For college. For your future. I'm struggling to pay the mortgage, Maya, but I'd never touch your money. I'm sacrificing everything to keep this roof over our heads." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was the saint who saved me from the orphanage. So, I got a job. I started waiting tables under the table at 15 just to buy my own school clothes and lunch. I handed over half my tips to her for groceries because the fridge was always empty, even though new Amazon packages arrived daily. By the time I was 18, the dynamic was set in stone. I was the provider. She was the dependent. I was the adult. She was the eternal, fragile child. She had convinced me that without her sacrifice, I would have been nothing. I didn't know then that the trust fund was a lie. I didn't know that the struggle to pay the mortgage was a fabrication. And I certainly didn't know that while I was scrubbing grease off diner tables to buy her wine, she was already laying the groundwork to steal the only thing my father had actually left me. I thought we were a family surviving a tragedy. I didn't realize I was just a host, and she was the parasite feeding on my guilt. 2 days later, Brenda announced she needed a mental health day at the spa to recover from the trauma of the tow truck incident. She drove off in her leased Mercedes, leaving me standing in the empty driveway with a gnawing suspicion in my gut. For years, her home office had been forbidden territory. "It's where I handle the complex finances, Maya," she'd say, closing the door in my face. "You wouldn't understand the paperwork." But that afternoon, with the house silent and the rain drumming against the windows, I didn't care about her rules. I cared about the repo notice I had found crumpled in the trash. I walked into the office. It smelled of stifling lavender air freshener, trying to cover up the scent of dust and secrets. The desk was buried under mountains of paper, unopened bills, catalogs, flyers. It was a hoarder's nest of financial denial. I started digging. My hands were shaking as I sifted through the chaos. I found a folder labeled business tucked under a pile of old receipts. I opened it, expecting to see her tax returns. Instead, I saw my own name staring back at me. Maya Creative Solutions, LLC. I froze. I had never opened a company. I was a freelancer. I worked under my own social security number. I flipped the page. A business loan approval. $50,000. Approved, dispersed, spent. I stared at the signature line. It was my name, written in a looping, flamboyant script that definitely wasn't mine. It was Brenda's. She had forged my signature to take out a massive loan against a fake business, using my credit history, which I had worked so hard to build, as collateral. My stomach turned. I felt like I was going to be sick right there on the carpet. But I kept digging. If she did this, what else had she done? I pushed aside a stack of Cosmopolitan magazines from 2015 and saw a thick, manila envelope taped to the underside of the desk drawer. It felt heavy, important. I ripped it open. Inside was a document on thick, legal paper. The header read, "Last Will and Testament of James R. Miller, my dad." I had never seen this. Brenda told me there was no will. She told me Dad died intestate and that the courts awarded everything to her as the surviving spouse because I was a minor. She told me she had to fight tooth and nail just to keep the house for us. I started reading, my eyes scanning frantically. Legal jargon, assets, and then, the clause that made the room spin. "I hereby bequeath the property located at 42 Evergreen Terrace solely to my daughter, Maya Miller, effective upon her 18th birthday. The house, this house, it wasn't hers. It was mine. It had been mine for 6 years. My mind flashed back to the morning of my 18th birthday. Brenda had made me pancakes. She was smiling, holding a stack of documents. "Just some boring insurance paperwork, sweetie," she had said, sliding a pen across the table. "Since you're an adult now, we need to update the deed insurance, so I can keep protecting you. Just sign here, here, and here." I remembered signing. I remembered trusting her. I remembered thanking her for handling the boring stuff so I could focus on school. I scrambled through the envelope and found the second document clipped to the back of the will. It wasn't insurance. It was a waiver of interest and a lifetime usufruct agreement. By signing those papers, I hadn't insured the house. I had legally transferred the usage rights to her for life, while agreeing to remain liable for the mortgage payments. I sat back on her expensive ergonomic chair, clutching the papers so hard the edges crumbled. The air left my lungs. She hadn't just stolen my credit. She hadn't just stolen my car. She had stolen my inheritance, my home, and my future. She had looked a grieving 14-year-old girl in the eye and plotted how to rob her. She had looked an 18-year-old in the eye and tricked her into signing away her birthright. For 10 years, I thought I was paying rent to help my struggling stepmother. In reality, I was paying the mortgage on my own house while she lived in it like a queen and treated me like a servant. The guilt that had weighed me down for a decade evaporated instantly. It was replaced by something colder, sharper, and much more dangerous. I wasn't the ungrateful daughter anymore. I was the landlord, and I had just found the evidence I needed to serve the ultimate eviction notice. I sat in the dark of my friend's guest room, the blue light of my laptop painting my face. On the screen was a live feed from the security camera I'd installed in the living room 3 months ago, back when I still thought I was installing it to protect us from burglars. Now, I realized I was using it to study the only burglar who had ever actually broken into my life. There she was, Brenda. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The house was silent, but looking at it through the grainy black and white lens, it looked less like a home and more like the inside of a stomach that couldn't digest anything. Towers of QVC boxes leaned precariously against the walls. Stacks of magazines from 2018 acted as makeshift tables. And in the center of it all, sitting on the edge of the sofa with a glass of cheap Chardonnay, was the woman who had terrorized me for a decade. She didn't look like the monster who had screamed at me in the driveway. She didn't look like the polished, grieving widow she played at church. She looked small, defeated. She was staring at a blank TV screen, muttering to herself, surrounded by a fortress of junk she hadn't touched in years. For a second, just a split second, that old, conditioned reflex kicked in. The urge to rush home, to fix it, to clean up the mess, to make her tea and tell her it would be okay. That was the good daughter programming she had installed in me. The button she had pressed every day since my dad's funeral. But then, I looked closer at the screen. I looked at the way she clutched that wine glass. And for the first time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a jailer sitting in the middle of the cell she built. I realized that her hoarding wasn't just about the porcelain dolls or the unworn clothes. It was about control. She kept things because she was terrified of letting anything go. And that included me. To Brenda, I wasn't a person. I was just another item in her collection, her most valuable possession, the one that paid the bills and absorbed her toxicity so she didn't have to drown in it alone. That's when the question that had haunted me for years finally found its answer. I used to lie awake at night wondering, why me? Why did she turn on me? What did I do wrong? I thought back to the nights she screamed at me because the dishwasher wasn't loaded correctly, or the times she blamed me for her migraines when bills came due. I used to think I was clumsy, or stupid, or ungrateful. But watching her now, alone in that clutter, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't about me. It never was. When my dad died, he didn't just leave her a widow, he left her powerless. Brenda was a woman who defined herself by who took care of her. When he left by dying, she felt abandoned, she felt small, insignificant, and terrified of the world. She couldn't scream at a dead man for leaving her behind. She couldn't demand that a ghost pay the mortgage or fix the leaking sink. She had all this rage, this terror, this venom building up inside her, and she had nowhere to put it. So, she found a place. She found me. Psychologists call it displacement, or the kick the cat theory. When a person feels helpless against a superior force like death, or poverty, or fate, they don't fight back up. They punch down. They find the one thing in their orbit that is smaller and weaker than them, and they unload everything. I became her target not because I was bad, but because I was there. I was 14. I was grieving. I was desperate for a mother. I was the perfect vessel. Every time she called me useless, she was talking to herself. Every time she stole my money to buy things she didn't need, she was trying to fill the hole my father left. Every time she sabotaged my independence, she was soothing her own panic about being alone. She broke me down systematically because seeing me broken was the only thing that made her feel whole. If I was weak, she was strong. If I was the ungrateful child, she got to be the saintly martyr. She needed me to be the villain in her story so she could remain the hero in her own delusional narrative. I zoomed in on her face on the screen. She looked miserable. A part of me, the part that still remembered her braiding my hair before the funeral, wanted to weep for her. But then I remembered the loan documents. I remembered the forged signature. I remembered the 10 years of my life she had eaten alive to feed that bottomless hunger inside her. Pity is a dangerous thing when you give it to a predator. It's what kept me trapped. I had spent my entire youth trying to set myself on fire to keep her warm, thinking that if I just burned bright enough, she would finally be happy. But a black hole doesn't want to be filled, it just wants to consume. The knot of guilt in my chest, the one that had been there since I was 14, finally unraveled. It dissolved into the cold, blue light of the laptop screen. I am not your savior, Brenda, I whispered to the silent room. And I am not your trash. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate implies passion. Hate implies that she still had power over my emotions. What I felt was something far colder. It was the clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor that needed to be removed. She had turned my empathy into a weapon against me. She had used my love as a leash. But looking at the sad, cluttered reality of her life, I realized the leash was gone. She was just a sad, lonely woman in a house she didn't own, waiting for a daughter who was never coming back. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, erasing her face. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't wondering how to please her. I wasn't wondering how to pay her bills. I was thinking about the lawyer I was meeting in 5 hours. I was thinking about the fraud report sitting in my bag. She wanted to play the victim? Fine. I was about to give her a reason to cry that was actually real. The days of me being her emotional punching bag were over. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to be the daughter. I was going to be the consequence. The next morning, I didn't storm back into the house screaming accusations. I didn't even call her. I knew Brenda. If I confronted her now, she'd gaslight me. She'd cry, claim it was a misunderstanding, or worse, destroy the rest of the evidence. I needed to be smarter than her. I needed to be a ghost in my own life. I called Mr. Henderson, my dad's old lawyer. He was retired now, living in Florida, but he picked up on the second ring. When I told him about the will I found, the line went dead silent for a long time. Maya, he said, his voice grave. That will was filed with the county 10 years ago. Brenda was the executor. She swore under oath that she would transfer the title to you on your 18th birthday. If she didn't, that's not just a mistake, that's probate fraud. She made me sign a waiver, I whispered, my hand gripping the phone. She told me it was insurance. If she misrepresented the document to a minor or a young adult under duress, that signature is voidable, he replied. But we need proof of the coercion, and we need proof of the financial abuse to show a pattern. That was the green light I needed. I spent the next 3 days living a double life. By day, I was the apologetic daughter, texting Brenda that I was staying with a friend to cool off and saving up to get the car back. I played into her narrative that I was the one who messed up. It kept her calm. It kept her from getting suspicious. By night, I was building my case. I met with a friend of mine, David, who worked in forensic accounting. We sat in a coffee shop until closing, poring over the photos I'd taken of the loan documents. This is bad, Maya, David said, pointing to the transaction history. She didn't just take out a loan. She's using your social security number to cycle money. See these deposits? They come in from the loan, go into a shell account, and then vanish into payments for luxury goods and gambling sites. Gambling? I asked, stunned. Online slots, he confirmed. Thousands of dollars a week. She's bleeding you dry to feed an addiction. He helped me pull my full credit report from all 3 bureaus. It was a massacre. Credit cards maxed out, utility bills in arrears. But the pièce de résistance was the tax lien. The IRS was looking for Maya Creative Solutions LLC for unpaid taxes on the $50,000 loan she'd treated as income. I was facing financial ruin, maybe even jail time for tax evasion. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced it down. What do? I asked. We go nuclear, David said. First, we freeze everything. I followed his instructions to the letter. This is the Freedom First Aid Kit for anyone in this nightmare. Listen carefully. First, I placed a fraud alert and a credit freeze on my files with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. This stopped her from opening any new accounts. It was like cutting the oxygen to a fire. Second, I went to the police station and filed a report for identity theft. Not against an unknown perpetrator. I named Brenda. I handed over the photos of the loan documents and the forged signatures. The officer looked at me with pity, but I didn't want pity. I wanted a case number. Without that police report, the banks wouldn't take me seriously. Third, and this was the hardest part, I had to separate myself physically and digitally. I got a new phone plan so she couldn't track my location or see my call logs. I changed every password, email, banking, social media. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything. I was severing the invisible umbilical cord she had wrapped around my neck. For 10 years, she had relied on my ignorance. She counted on me being too scared, too guilty, or too dutiful to check the paperwork. She thought she had raised a sheep. She was about to find out she had raised a wolf. A week later, I moved out. I didn't announce it. I didn't hire a truck. I packed my clothes and my laptop into 2 suitcases while Brenda was asleep, and I left. I crashed on my friend David's couch, but I wasn't just hiding. I was waiting. Because even though I had physically left the house, I hadn't left digitally. You see, Brenda loved smart things. She loved telling her friends she could control the lights with her voice and check the thermostat from her phone, but she didn't know how to install any of it. I did. I was the admin on everything. The security cameras, the Nest thermostat, the electronic locks, and most importantly, the Wi-Fi. The first strike happened on a Tuesday evening. Brenda was doing a Facebook Live for her fans, mostly other bored housewives she tried to sell essential oils to. She was walking through the living room, holding up a bottle of lavender oil, wearing a silk robe she bought with my credit card. "Welcome to my sanctuary, ladies," she cooed at the phone. "It's so important to have a peaceful environment for your mental health." I was sitting in David's kitchen, watching her stream on one screen, and holding my finger over the disconnect button on the other. "It's just me and my positive energy tonight," she continued, smiling that fake, tight smile. "No negativity allowed." I clicked disconnect. On the screen, her video froze. The reconnecting wheel started spinning. I switched to the security camera feed. I saw her tapping her phone aggressively. She marched over to the router and started shaking it, as if physical violence would bring the internet back. Then, I opened the banking app. We had a joint checking account. It was the account my survivor benefits used to go into, and later, where I deposited my paychecks. She used it as her personal piggy bank, but technically, my name was still on it. I transferred every single cent of my documented earnings out of that account and into my new, secure one. It wasn't stealing. It was a withdrawal. 30 minutes later, my phone lit up. It was her. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. Finally, I picked up. "Maya," she shrieked. "What did you do? The internet is down. And my card. I tried to order dinner and it was declined. Fix it, now." Her voice was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She sounded like a toddler who had been told screen time was over. "I can't fix it, Brenda," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I don't live there anymore." "What do you mean you don't live there? You're just throwing a tantrum. Get home right now. The router is blinking red." "It's blinking red because I canceled the service," I explained. "The account was in my name. I was paying for it. Since I'm not there to use it, I shut it off." Silence. Dead silence. You shut off the internet?" she whispered, horrified. "But I need it. How am I supposed to work? How am I supposed to watch my shows?" "Use your data," I suggested. "Oh, wait. The family plan is in my name too. I'll be canceling that tomorrow." "You ungrateful little brat," she exploded. "After everything I've done for you, I put a roof over your head. I saved you from the system. And this is how you repay me? By cutting me off like a criminal?" "I didn't cut you off, Brenda," I said coldly. "I just stopped paying for a lifestyle I can't afford. You told me if I was so ungrateful, I should leave. So I did. Good luck with the bills." "I'm calling the police," she threatened. "I'm telling them you stole my money. I'm telling them you abandoned a vulnerable widow." "Go ahead," I replied. "Call them. Tell them everything. Tell them about the loan, too." I heard a sharp intake of breath. She knew. She stammered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will," I said. "Check the mail tomorrow. There's something coming for you, and it's not an Amazon package." I hung up. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. From adrenaline. The first brick had fallen. The wall was coming down. 3 days later, I saw the cars lining the street. A dozen of them. Honda Civics, Ford trucks, Aunt Carol's beat-up minivan. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the driveway was packed. Brenda was throwing a party. Technically, she called it a birthday celebration, even though her birthday was in November and it was currently mid-July. But Brenda never let a calendar get in the way of a fundraising opportunity. I knew exactly what was happening inside. She had summoned the family tribunal. She was weeping into a store-bought cake, spinning a sob story about her delinquent, thief of a stepdaughter who had stripped her accounts and left her destitute. She was passing the collection plate, guilting my uncles and cousins into loaning her money to keep the lights on. I parked my rental car 2 houses down. I wasn't alone. In the passenger seat sat Mr. Henderson's associate, a sharp-eyed lawyer named Jessica. In the back seat sat a process server and 2 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit. "You ready?" Jessica asked, adjusting her glasses. I looked at the house. My house. I've been ready for 10 years. We walked up the driveway. I could hear the murmur of voices inside, the clinking of silverware, the smell of Brenda's signature pot roast, the one she only cooked when she wanted something from people. I didn't knock. I used my key. The one she thought she had revoked access to. The door swung open, and the noise inside died instantly. 20 heads turned. My aunts, uncles, cousins, people I had grown up with, people who had watched me shrink under Brenda's shadow for a decade, stared at me like I was a ghost. Or an intruder. Brenda was standing at the head of the dining table, a glass of wine raised halfway to her lips. She looked perfect, hair done, makeup flawless, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. But when she saw me, her face contorted. It wasn't fear yet. It was rage. "You!" she hissed, slamming the glass down. Wine sloshed onto the tablecloth. "You have the nerve to show your face here? After what you did?" She turned to the room, gesturing wildly. "Look! Here she is, the girl who stole my money and abandoned me to rot. Call the police, Bob. Call them right now." Uncle Bob stood up, his face red. "Maya, you should be ashamed. Your mother is sick with worry." "She's not my mother," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. "And I didn't steal her money. I just stopped letting her steal mine." "Liar!" Brenda screamed, lunging forward. Get out of my house." "Sit down, Brenda," I commanded. It was the first time in my life I had ever given her an order. The shock of it froze her in place. I walked to the table. Jessica and the officers stepped into the room behind me. The presence of uniforms sucked the air out of the room. Uncle Bob sat back down slowly. I placed a heavy stack of documents on the table, right next to the birthday cake. "This," I said, pointing to the first pile, "is a copy of the loan application for Maya Creative Solutions. A $50,000 business loan taken out 6 months ago." I looked around the room. Did anyone here know I owned a business? Silence. "I didn't think so," I continued. "Because I don't. But according to this application, I do. And according to this forensic handwriting analysis." I slapped another paper down. "The signature on the loan belongs to Brenda." Brenda's face went pale beneath her blush. That's a misunderstanding. I was managing your finances. I was building your credit. By spending it on online slots?" I asked. I tossed the bank statements onto the table. They fanned out like a deck of cards. Page after page of gambling losses. Thousands of dollars, all traceable to the IP address of this house. All funded by a fraudulent loan in my name. Aunt Carol picked up a statement, her hands shaking. She looked at Brenda. "Brenda." "She fabricated it," Brenda shrieked, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an ally. "She's good with computers. She faked it all." "I didn't fake the IRS audit notice," I said, dropping the next bombshell. "Since you declared that loan as income but didn't pay taxes on it, the IRS is coming. And since you used my identity, they came for me. But don't worry, I've already filed the affidavit of identity theft. They know it wasn't me, which means they know it was you." The room was deadly quiet now. The relatives were shifting in their seats, avoiding my eyes. And that's when I felt it, a sharp, stinging ache in my chest that had nothing to do with Brenda. I looked at Uncle Bob, who had just yelled at me. I looked at Aunt Carol, who had brought potato salad to this party. For years, these people had watched. They saw me wearing ragged clothes while Brenda wore silk. They saw me working double shifts while Brenda lunched. They saw the way she spoke to me, the way she treated me like a servant in my own home. And they did nothing. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from being the invisible member of a family. It's not just the abuse from the abuser, it's the silence of the bystanders. They accepted Brenda's narrative because it was easier. It was easier to believe I was the difficult child than to confront the fact that their sister-in-law was a monster. They sacrificed me to keep the peace. They let me drown because saving me would have been awkward. You all believed her, I said, my voice trembling slightly. For 10 years, you watched her bleed me dry, and you called it parenting. You ate her food, drank her wine, and never once asked why the 14-year-old girl was paying for the groceries. Uncle Bob looked down at his plate. Aunt Carol started to cry. But that's not the worst part, I said, turning back to Brenda. She was backing away now, towards the kitchen door. The worst part is this house. I picked up the final document, the will. You told me Dad died without a will, I said, stepping closer to her. You told me the court gave you the house. You told me I was a guest here. I was protecting you, she stammered, her back hitting the refrigerator. You were too young. You would have lost it. My father left this house to me, I said, holding the document up for everyone to see. To me. Alone. Effective on my 18th birthday. The waiver! Brenda yelled, grasping at straws. You signed the waiver! You gave me lifetime rights! A waiver signed under duress and fraudulent misrepresentation is void. Jessica spoke up for the first time, her voice cool and professional. We've already filed the motion, and given the overwhelming evidence of financial abuse and fraud, the judge granted an emergency order this morning. I looked Brenda dead in the eye. The woman who had terrified me. The woman who had made me feel small. She looked tiny now, shrunken by the weight of her own lies. You always told me, I said, my voice steady and hard, that this house was built on your blood, sweat, and tears. You told me I should be grateful you let me sleep under your roof. I leaned in close, so she could hear the end of her world arriving. Well, you were right about one thing, Brenda. This house does require payment. But you're the one in debt. I pointed to the door. Get out of my house. You can't do this, she screamed, looking at the police officers. This is my home. I have rights. I raised her. The officer stepped forward. Ma'am, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding identity theft and bank fraud, and we have a court order to vacate the premises. You can come with us quietly, or we can do this the hard way. Brenda looked at the family. Help me, Bob, Carol, don't let her do this. Nobody moved. The silence of the bystanders had finally turned against her. As the officers handcuffed her, the click of the metal echoing through the silent dining room, she started to weep. Real, ugly tears. Not the performance tears she used at the funeral. These were tears of a woman who realized the audience had finally left the theater. I watched them lead her out. I watched her pass the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. I watched her pass the happy birthday banner she had hung for herself. And as the door closed behind her, I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt light. The gravity in the room shifted. The air cleared. I turned back to the table of stunned relatives. The party's over, I said. Please leave your keys on the table on your way out. The police lights flashed against the living room window, painting the dusty porcelain dolls in alternating shades of red and blue. It was a surreal strobe light show in a house that had been stuck in the dark for a decade. As the officers escorted Brenda down the front steps, she didn't hang her head in shame. She didn't cover her face. She twisted her neck around, locking eyes with me one last time. She wasn't looking at the neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. She was looking at her food source. How can you do this? She wailed, her voice cracking with a desperation that almost sounded real. I raised you. I kept you out of the system. I am the only mother you have left. Uncle Bob shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. I could feel the heavy gaze of my family on my back. Even with the evidence spread out on the table, the forged loans, the stolen inheritance, the gambling debts, there was still that lingering, ancient social programming kicking in. She's family. You don't call the cops on family. You don't make your mother homeless. Brenda knew that. She was banking on it. She was trying to weaponize my own humanity against me one last time. Maya, she screamed as they guided her into the back of the cruiser. You're going to regret this. You'll be all alone. You need me. The door slammed shut, cutting off her voice. I stood there on the porch, watching the car pull away. The rain had stopped, leaving the street slick and black. Uncle Bob cleared his throat. Maya? We didn't know. About the will. About the gambling. You didn't want to know, I said, not turning to face him. Because knowing would have meant you had to do something. They left quickly after that. There were no hugs, no warm reconciliations, just the awkward shuffling of feet and the sound of car engines starting up. They were embarrassed, not because they had misjudged me, but because they had been witnesses to a truth they could no longer ignore. They left their keys on the table, just like I asked, and retreated back to their comfortable lives, where nieces don't get sued by the IRS, and stepmothers aren't arrested for fraud. When the last car turned the corner, silence crashed back into the house. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, stagnant. I closed the front door and locked it. For the first time in 10 years, the lock clicked shut to keep danger out, not to keep me in. I walked into the living room and sat on the arm of the sofa, the only spot not covered in old newspapers. I looked around at the wreckage of my inheritance. The peeling wallpaper Brenda had promised to fix. The water stain on the ceiling she said we couldn't afford to repair. The mountains of useless junk she had bought with my credit. I expected to feel a rush of victory. I expected to feel like the hero in a movie who just defeated the villain. But I just felt tired, hollow. A lot of people in the comments might call this revenge. They might say I was cold for letting her get arrested, for letting her get evicted. They might say, she was sick, she needed help, not handcuffs. But standing in that silent, broken house, I realized something important. There is a massive, fundamental difference between revenge and natural consequences. Revenge is when you go out of your way to hurt someone because they hurt you. Revenge is setting their car on fire. Revenge is active. It requires malice. What I did wasn't revenge. It was physics. For 10 years, Brenda had been living on a foundation of lies. She took out loans she couldn't pay. She lived in a house she didn't own. She spent money she didn't earn. She built a tower of cards and forced me to stand at the bottom, holding it up with my bare hands. All I did today was step away. I didn't knock the tower over. Gravity did. I didn't make her homeless. Her decision to gamble away the mortgage payments did. I didn't send her to jail. Her signature on those fraudulent loan applications did. When a parasite loses its host, it starves. That's not the host being cruel. That's just nature correcting an imbalance. Brenda had gambled her entire life on the assumption that I would never be smart enough, brave enough, or ungrateful enough to check the paperwork. She bet the house on my submission. She lost the bet. I walked over to the dining table, where the birthday cake still sat, untouched. The frosting was starting to melt. I picked up the stack of papers, the proof of her crimes, and the folder containing my father's will. "It's over, Dad," I whispered. The house was a mess. It smelled like stale wine and old dust. It would take months to clean out the hoard. It would take years to fix my credit score. The IRS audit was still looming over my head like a storm cloud, and I knew the legal battle was just beginning. But as I looked around the clutter, I saw something else. I saw the floorboards my dad had installed himself. I saw the fireplace where we used to hang stockings. Underneath the layers of Brenda's sickness, the bones of this house, my house, were still strong. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a servant. I was the owner. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a trash bag. The big, heavy-duty black ones. I walked back to the living room, picked up a stack of QVC catalogs from 2019, and dropped them into the bag. The sound of them hitting the plastic was the most satisfying thing I had heard all day. Then I picked up the porcelain doll that Brenda loved so much, the one with the creepy, staring eyes that watched me while I cleaned. I dropped it in the bag. Thud. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally felt like my own. The cleanup was going to be long. It was going to be dirty. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't cleaning up for her. I was cleaning up for me. The professional cleaners left an hour ago. The house smells of bleach and lemon pledge now, instead of dust and stale wine. The silence here is different too. It's not the heavy, suffocating silence of a secret being kept. It's the echoey, open silence of a blank page. I stood in the center of the living room, looking at the spot where Brenda's fortress of boxes used to be. I thought I would feel ecstatic. I thought I would want to dance. But honestly, I just felt exhausted. It was a deep, bone-weary tiredness, like I had just finished running a marathon I never signed up for. But beneath the exhaustion, there was peace. Real peace. I know there are people watching this who are still running that marathon. Maybe you're the responsible one in your family. Maybe you're the one paying the rent while your parents play the victim. Maybe you're staying in a toxic situation because you're terrified of being called ungrateful. I want to tell you something I learned in the dark of this room. We are raised to believe that family is a debt we can never repay. We are told that because they fed us, clothed us, or in my case, didn't send us to an orphanage, we owe them our entire existence. We are taught that setting a boundary is an act of betrayal. But I need you to hear this. Life is a gift, not a high-interest loan. If someone loves you, they don't keep a tally of everything they've ever done for you. They don't weaponize their basic responsibilities to chain you to them. Brenda didn't save me because she loved me. She saved me because she needed a retirement plan. She needed a crutch. She needed a hostage. For 10 years, I let her treat me like an investment that needed to pay dividends. I let her guilt me into believing that my freedom was a form of theft. But love isn't a transaction. Caregiving isn't a contract. And you cannot owe a debt to someone who is actively robbing you of your future. If you are setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, and they are complaining that you aren't burning bright enough, blow out the match. Walk away. It will be scary. They will scream. They will call you names. They will tell the world you are a monster. Let them. The people who matter will see the truth. And the people who believe the lies? They were never on your side to begin with. I walked to the front door and opened it. The rain had finally stopped, and the air outside smelled like wet pavement and pine needles. The repo man still had my car. My credit score was still in the double digits. I had a mountain of legal fees ahead of me, but for the first time in my life, the bill in my hand belonged to me. I stepped out onto the porch and locked the door behind me. I didn't owe Brenda an explanation. I didn't owe her a visit. And I certainly didn't owe her my life. She told me to pay my own bills. So I did. I paid the cost of my freedom. And it was worth every single cent.